So welcome to the Glasgow Clinical Trials Forum 2022. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Rod Taylor. I'm a Professor of Population Health Research in Glasgow. And just in terms of, I guess, my credentials of being up here and talking about clinical trials, I came back to Glasgow years ago, my alma mater, so great to be back. I did my PhD in the Western, where we're at, where we actually are now. The dinosaurs were roaming the earth then. So it's good to be back. So my background, I'm a former director of a clinical trials unit where I was there in Exeter for about 10 years. My own interest myself, I'm a cardiovascular researcher, so I got interested in doing trials in cardiac rehab. And then last but not least, I'm the Glasgow lead for what's called the doctoral training programme in clinical trials methodology here in Glasgow. So just a little bit about me. So for those of you who are new to our forum, this is in fact our third annual forum this year. Some of you may join previous years. So 2021 was our first forum. We met on the Queen Elizabeth campus across the river. We had an in-person meeting. Last year, of course, we couldn't do what we're wonderfully able to do now, which is actually all be together. So we had a Zoom meeting. So obviously this is our third year, and I just want to acknowledge the fact that I think we had about 100 people registered today. I think there are a couple of no-shows, maybe the weather, traffic, etc. So we've got about 100 in the room, and then we've also got about, Ross, 50, 60 online, that many? Okay, a few online anyway who are joining us soon. So maybe just one of the things I'm going to do while we're talking about Zoom is just double check. Are those people who are online, is everybody hearing me okay? Are they hearing the room? Because I'm hearing the speaker coming in and coming out a little bit here. Thanks, John. You're hearing the same. Your mics. Maybe adjust your mic. I think I need to move it up a little bit. Okay, is that better? Thanks, John. So we okay on sound on Zoom? Are people hearing us all right, Ross and Steve? Yep. Yeah, okay, great. So I think the other thing I just wanted to also say is how great it is to be in this building. So I've got to say, this is, I think, my second time I came for a visit when we were looking for a venue. So this is the Advanced Research Centre of ARC at the university, and represents obviously a huge investment that the university is making, which I'm delighted to say also includes the new public health building that I'm very much looking forward to moving into myself, which is Paris Claire's, which is the building over to the left. But we thought it highly appropriate to try and put our forum in this venue today. So do take the opportunity while you're here to have a look around. This is a public resource and a great resource going forward. So before I introduce our two speakers today, I just wanted to say a couple of general things about this meeting. So I think the first one is, why have this forum? And I guess there's probably at least a couple of reasons why we've continued with this forum. So one is, I think it is, it is coming and going. It is an opportunity for us to come and learn about some innovation going on in the clinical trial space. And in a moment, I'll introduce our keynote speaker who will be doing some of that for us. But I think as I was reflecting, as some of you are coming in, it's just great to be able to come together as those interested in clinical trials. And just to say today, we purposely tried to advertise this event not only within the university, but we've also got our NHS friends here today. So bring together university, NHS. We've got people who are working in delivery trials, so research managers, project managers. We've got chief investigators here. We've got ologists like statisticians, health economists. So actually to put ourselves all in the room, we don't much get a chance to do that. And today is very much an intentional opportunity to sort of try and allow that live networking. I think the other comment I was going to make is that our two previous forums have been a little bit like what you're having to do with me now, which is a little bit talk and shock. So there've been pretty much presentations where we've had some Q&A. Yes, we'll have that element at the start of the meeting today. So if we look at our programme, we will have a couple of presentations, our keynote speakers, and then we'll hear from our Vice Principal. But actually, we're intentionally mixing it up today. And we're going to put you into small groups and more about that later. But really, one of the main purposes today is to really allow you to have the opportunity to have some discussions around what we think are some of the challenges going forward for Glasgow in the clinical trials area, and importantly, allow us to take the pulse of maybe how we go forward with our strategy on some of these items. So I think just to sum up for me before I introduce our first speaker, a couple of bits of housekeeping. So no fire alarm expected today. Fire alarm goes off, it's the real thing. The fire exits are actually directly behind you. So there are the two doors at the front, and the assembly area is out in the terrace in front of us. For those of you who haven't found it yet, I'm going to do my stewardess bit. So on my left and right, there are bathrooms, both males and females, on both sides of confusingly this level 2, which is in fact the ground floor. Yeah. I think the only other thing to say is that if you are online, just make sure you're mute. But also, if you're online, there will be an opportunity to make some questions for our keynote speaker. So there is a Q&A function. So if you're online, please use that. And obviously, we'll be taking some questions in the room as well. Great. Okay, so I think that's enough about the introductions. Thank you for bearing with me. So it's with great pleasure I now would like to introduce our keynote speaker. Our keynote speaker is Matt Sydes. Matt is Professor of Clinical Trials and Methodology at University College London. And I think we're very fortunate to have Matt, because I think one of the things that's happened coming out of COVID, and many of you may have read the paper that came from the 4 devolved countries, and they identified 5 key things that we need to do to be moving health service research forward in UK. And one of those Matt is going to talk about, which is the whole area of using digital information, large data to help us do trials. And Matt will talk to us about that. The other areas that were mentioned in that report, just out of interest, were embedding research in practice. We've got to do better at that, getting things into the NHS, or those of us who work in public health, there, making our research more patient-centric, and efficiency and innovation, and then finally sustainability around our research. But going back to Matt, so as well as being Professor of Clinical Trials Methodology at UCL, Matt shared with me last night at dinner. He's been now at the MRC Clinical Trials Centre really for your professional life. So thank you for sharing that, Matt. And in addition to that, also has a role within the British Heart Foundation, where he is currently the Associate Director of the BHF Science Centre. And Matt may talk about that. And last but not least, if I may, Matt also shared he's a West Ham fan. So Matt, how did the result? So it's 1-1 when I left you. 3-1 win in the end. Right, so Matt's some good talk. So 3-1 win for West Ham last night, so that's all great. So Matt, thank you very much for coming up to London. We're delighted to have you. We look forward to hearing your wise words.
Needed mirrors. No, apparently not. Yes, please. Smooth hand over here. Oh, such a wonderful introduction, but I'm so sorry. Lovely. Thank you so much. Excellent. Good morning, everyone. Can I see my slides on this screen here again?
Yeah, it's just going up.
That's great. Yeah, that's good. Yeah, perfect. That's lovely. Thanks so much for, good morning, everyone. Thanks for having me here today on a strange day overall, but let's talk research. So we're going to talk digitally enabled clinical trials. How far away is the future as a title I was given? Of course, the question that you're all thinking about point, of course, is, if this comes up, maybe I was supposed to be left-handed. Does that work? I don't seem to be moving on, Ross. Excellent. There's just a delay. This could be, given that we've got like 700 slides to get through. So, yeah, okay. So that question is, are we nearly there yet? That's what we're really asking. And the spoiler was already on the screen, because the answer is mostly no. But if the answer was yes, we wouldn't be here doing this particular presentation. So what we can talk about is really, what does there mean? Where is it we're actually trying to get to with this? So I want to set the scene a little bit. I want to talk to you about some of the huge potential for routine data. I'll pick up some of the challenges I have actually in that term itself for clinical trials. We'll talk about some of the real perceived barriers and challenges that there are in using this data. And I'll talk about some of the activities I'm involved with in a number of places. Sorry, what I really want to do though is give you a sense of where we are at the moment, a sense of where I think we should be trying to get to, and a sense that I want to make sure that you want to be getting to that same place too, because I think that's really important here. So I don't need to tell this room, of course, and our folk online, that clinical trials are the best way to improve healthcare for patients and the public in an evidence-based way, of course. But they cost a huge amount to do, and they take a really long time. They involve effort from hundreds, if not thousands of people, not just the participants, but the people at centres. We need a way to simplify the process while still gaining the highest quality evidence, of course. A better use of routine data is one of the stepping stones to that transformation, I think. So let's talk about definitions. I don't think there's uniform definitions of these terms, so let me give you a sense of how I'm going to use them today. I'm thinking of electronic health records, electronic medical records, electronic patient records. It's kind of your local copies, what you've got at the hospital, it's what your GPs got. You'll often hear people talk about real-world data, real-world evidence. I think of real-world evidence being what's generated using real-world data, but I don't think the term itself is particularly a helpful or specific one. You'll often hear people talk about routinely collected healthcare data, and I'll drop into that term a number of times. Sometimes it's just routinely collected data, because administrative data is really important as well. Connecting in education or other information can be really important into trials, but mostly it's healthcare that we're talking about. But not everything that ends up in these systems is routine, of course. If you join a clinical trial, you might have some additional scans, you might have some additional visits. They're only in the records because you had the extra element of being in the trial. There's nothing routine about that interaction itself. So it's over and above. So I prefer the term healthcare systems data. I think that captures it well. Marion Mahman, Oxford, introduced me to that term. May even have coined it, I don't know. But I think that's quite a helpful way of doing it. And then data-enabled trials is often the term, as Rod says. It seems to be my title at the BHF Data Science Centre. But of course, what trials aren't enabled by data? What are we doing? Making stuff up otherwise? Maybe digitally enabled is helpful, but I'm still not sure that's the right term either. Now, okay. So of course, there's considerable overlap between the data that we need for clinical trials and the data that's collected in healthcare systems. It'd be weird if there wouldn't. It's not a perfect overlap, of course. What we need in trials is often additional. There's plenty of stuff in healthcare systems data that we don't need for trials. But your timely and appropriate use of that healthcare systems data really could transform how the majority of clinical trials, late phase, non-commercial clinical trials are done. Reduce that duplication of effort at sites, reduce transcription errors if we're putting things into EDC or if you're still putting things onto paper and then entering it again, which happens with many of the trials I've been involved with. Could improve other aspects of quality, particularly completeness of data. And it would allow the trial teams to focus on actually the bits that really need time and attention, monitoring the processes rather than the data. And overall, this should reduce trial costs. And given how tight we are with the funding envelopes, it may allow us to do more research within the same funding envelope. And it may even reduce the burden on patients too. And of course, there are risks in not using healthcare systems data. Yeah, there may well be missed events, admissions to other hospitals that trial teams wouldn't pick up. I think of my aunt, bless her, who last year managed to end up visiting planned or not planned, 5 different hospitals in 3 weeks in Bedfordshire and Cambridgeshire. I'm pretty sure if she was in a trial, she wasn't, but I'm pretty sure if she was in a trial, at least one of those would have been missed somewhere, whereas healthcare systems data, that would have been recorded. And of course, if we use it not for outcomes, for identifying patients, we know that a real challenge for trials is actually recruiting enough patients and using healthcare systems data to make sure that we get patients in, so our trials are large enough to give appropriate answers would be really helpful. But I say, I'm going to keep coming back to the default position to me is late phase, non-commercial trials. You know, I think there's gains to be made in all areas, but it's simpler if we're thinking about those aspects. So as Rod said, I'm a Professor of Clinical Trials and Methodology. I co-lead the trial conduct methodology work at the MRC Clinical Trials Unit. I'm the Associate Director for Data-Enabled Trials at the VHF Data Science Centre, where I'm seconded day a week. I'm on the Executive Committee with Rod for the MRC NIHR Trials Methodology Research Partnership, and I'm co-chairing the Health Informatics Working Group there. And I'm also co-leading the Health Data Research UK's second 5-year bid for clinical trials. I'm going to touch upon some of the research I'm doing and aware of with all of those hats on. So let's say if we come back to that context, I think there's a broad range of opinions out there at the moment. From the skeptics who tell you it's not worth even thinking about this. You can never get the data are out of date by the time you get them, you can't use the data at all. To the other end, there are a number of true believers who are adamant that we should always be using routine data all the time. What the hell are you doing even not thinking about it at the moment? And actually, I suspect both positions at the moment are wrong, which is why it's an area just ripe for guidance and for research. So are trials even accessing electronic health records? Well, I'm going to answer that question. This is something we've done from the MRC Clinical Trials Unit. So let me just very briefly give you an introduction to that unit where, as Rod said, I've grown up, started in '95 as a little boy in short trousers. It's one of the largest and longest standing clinical trials units in the country. It was actually formed in '98 together from the MRC Cancer Trials Office, where I originally joined, and the HIV Cancer Clinical Trials Centre in London. Both of those came from a common group which actually was involved in running that first randomized controlled trial, that MRC streptomycin trial many years ago. So it's a sort of nice sort of history to it. The original director was Janet Derbyshire, director for the last 10 years, pictured here as Max Palmer. And the unit focuses on cancer, on infections, newly on neurodegenerative diseases, and then on methodology research, broken down in design, conduct, analysis and meta-analysis. And it's a conduct research where I'm mostly focused these days. So let's come back to this. Are trials accessing electronic health records? Sarah Lenson in my team did some research. She managed to get hold of the records. She reached out to 81 registries, groups that were holding some form of healthcare systems data, and found between 2013 and 2018 that 22 of them claimed to have provided some data that would be used for clinical trials. Now that works out, that was relevant to 160 trials. Now, we think from sort of census data that we did at the Health Research Authority in 2015, or about 900 trials that were done that year that went past an ethics committee. That works out to be about 3% of UK trials. So it's a really small proportion of trials accessing this data. But we also need to bear in mind, so we looked at the releases, only about 2% of the releases from all of these actually are anything to do with clinical trials at all. So clinical trials are such a small part of the business that any of these groups are doing that the sorts of special issues, the challenges that we have are unfamiliar to them. So what we found is a majority of those 160 trials have got data from NHS Digital, from ISD Scotland, from Public Health England, which is called now part of NHS Digital, and there's logos there for many of the groups. And it was mostly large cancer or cardiovascular trials that were asking for that data. And we tried to categorize why they were asking for the data. It's quite a lot about routine collected health data that we're just using for outcome data. Some was about cross-checking self-reported data. This was our categorization. So there was no sort of uniform reason why the data were actually being used. Just skip back. So yeah, we've got that contrast between so few trials in the UK are doing this and how many trials think they should be doing this. So there are case studies. Trying to access the data is really important. Here's an example that Archie McNair, who's an MD student at the MRC Clinical Trials Unit, put out. What started as a rant, supposed to be spending 3 years of his MD looking at routine data, comparing cardiovascular outcomes where people were at risk in 2 cancer trials, but actually couldn't get the damn data at all. And what they say started out as a rant, which turned into a very constructive paper full of recommendations. That we co-authored with some of the data collated, which I think was really important. And his key messages were it's challenging to acquire the data if you don't plan for it up front. So it makes sense, even if you're not going to rely heavily on the data, plan to include it, that you need appropriate infrastructure at every clinical trials unit to be able to do this. And actually the applicants need help, need experience in being able to address the questions that are even there. And we need more case studies in there. I was commenting on the train on the way up yesterday with another case study of someone who's had challenges trying to get hold of data. But there have been notable successes. Recovery trial in COVID-19 has had a wealth of data, and they've done brilliantly out of this. But the door was open very wide for them, right? And is the door still open for the rest of us going forward? I'm not convinced whether that's the case. And as many of us as possible should be trying to put our foot into that door. Okay, so Health Data Research UK is the National Institute for Health Data Science. It's been around sort of 5 years now. They're looking to unite health data. The bottom middle is a teeny tiny picture of Andrew Morris, who's director. As I say, this is innovative. It's UK-wide research institute without walls. It's virtual. Everybody's separated all over the place. So a huge number of people involved in this. I've just highlighted or not faded out the people involved in the Pillar 3 work that's under review at the moment. Infrastructure, data infrastructure that's there, of which clinical trials is part. But why should Health Data Research UK have a focus on trial? Well, our argument, of course, they understand that clinical trials are the gold standard, but the clinical trials are different to other forms of research in many ways, and that's why we have these challenges. They're run within a complex regulatory framework. We take informed consent from patients so we can link people. We've got prospective data collection. We're not just dealing with what's in the system already. We've got this random allocation of treatment. We've got these strict follow-up protocols. We've got strict reporting standards for how we do things. And of course, the results of clinical trials may directly impact healthcare decisions going forward, so they're the highest quality evidence. And in many ways, of course, they're the only route to testing treatments that aren't already in use. So they know that they need to be able to act on clinical trials. So they brought together in the last QQ with NIHR, with the Clinical Practice Research Data League, a day for data-enabled trials to focus on the art of the possible, really. Very positive mind, to put the problems to one side. How do we do this? Showcase what had been done with case studies and lessons. I ended up writing up the paper for this to lead this, but there's 5 case studies they focused on that data. They're all accessed and used data, and their lessons are in there. Their recommendations, of course, that there should be wider adoption of these data-enabled methods because of the benefits that can come through in simplifying the trials. That we need to build in methodology, though. You build in the assessment so we can test this and convince other people we can use this in the future. If you're going to be going to regulators, you need early engagement. If you can do anything with the regulator, you want early engagement, of course, so that's obvious. We need better interoperability about healthcare systems data, and I think that ties in with what you saw Vicky's question. Even if you've got separate data sets, you've got to be able to connect them together. You need a clear map for accessing. People keep threatening to get a map. There is no map. There's no help for how you get that data at the moment. And we need better sharing of examples, more capacity and capability building that isn't there at the moment. One of the issues that came out is you need to know that integrity, particularly of the data, particularly if you go to the regulators. And the regulators were involved in writing that paper. They were there. They said you need to know that the data are source data, ideally against the Alcoa Plus principles. And we need to check up front that the regulator is going to be happy. And soon after that, it took us forever to write this damn paper. But during the time it was being drafted, the MHRA put out their statement talking about the need to demonstrate the quality of the data. So we did some work to start to look at this with Macy Murray, who's part of the team at MRCCTU, funded by Health Data Research UK, and seconded 2 days a week to NHS Digital. So in part of our strategic partnership, the aim was to demonstrate the integrity of 2 of the healthcare systems datasets, highest hospital episode statistics, acute patient care, and the death data, but also to set out a process which could then be applied to other processes. So that required effectively, this methodology, operational methodology, is documenting the tools, the systems, the controls, the lineage, the access of the data. How are the data collected from healthcare systems? How is it sort of sucked out of the hospitals, out of the GP, and given to NHS Digital? And what's their centralized processing and curation? Do they bugger around with the data, or is it exactly what it should be? And what's a linkage and onward processing? So she sort of mapped all of this out. And I'm not going to run through this diagram. There's a full, but now it's all documented for those two data sets. So we can confirm the life cycle of the data and how it gets to there. And if you then use that data, we've effectively confirmed that integrity. We've met with the MHRA, and they won't say yes to anything directly, will they? But they will. They were supportive of the approach, and they did say it was useful, suitable for use of trial data. Now, they wouldn't say this is source data, but they did say, let me get this, it's equivalent to a transcribed copy of the original source data, which effectively means it's the same as the source data. So you can treat it as if it's the source data, even though it's not quite the source data. So, these two data sets you could then use. You've just got to document why you're using it in your trial master file, so that when the inspector comes a knocking at some point for your trial, it's documented there. If you want the full report, it's in Zenodo, 50-page report. It's a bit daunting, but lots of good detail on that. 800-word editorial in Lancet Digital Health. 800 words is very accessible for everybody. And in there as a tool is a template you can use to document in your trial master file why you're using a particular data set. And interestingly, we've influenced the MHRA guidelines. They now say, what's their wording here? All-cause mortality and inpatient hospitalizations are known to be well recorded in the UK general population. They put that after our discussions with them. They haven't credited us, bless them, but they've only done this because of this work. So we're expanding that. Health Data Research UK has now funded a small project, again, joint with NHS Digital and the Clinical Trials Unit. NHS Digital is applying a new program called Calibre, which is effectively systematizing that process of documentation across all of its healthcare systems data. So moving from 2 to hopefully all 40-something data sets that they hold. And then we're writing to other data providers, other data collectors to challenge them to use and maintain that process, which should be a game changer forward. So a really important step in this. So those letters will go out shortly, and CPRD has agreed to be the first that will take this on. So at the moment, I was focusing on non-commercial trials, but industry, where their trials cost way too much, or 1 to 2 orders of magnitude more than our academic trials, they haven't been using healthcare systems data, and if they could, that could make a real difference in the processes. But they're unsure what regulators are going to think of the data, so they don't want to go near it. But regulators won't assess it on their own. They think about the case studies that are put in front of them. So if they don't see those case studies in industry, they're going to judge them. So we hope that data integrity, the work we've done, effectively breaks that cycle, which will start to build confidence for industry to be able to use it. One of the other things you need to know, of course, is the data utility of the data. Is it appropriate? Is the data that you get at least as good as your trial-specific data collection? We can do this with little comparisons with studies within a trial approach. You effectively seek evidence that the healthcare systems data could have replaced your trial-specific data collection. So you can compare that routine data, whether it's in terms of the number of events or in terms of the treatment effect. There's a few ways that you could do this. Here's one that we did in a trial of Barrett's esophagus, a screening trial. This was done by actually an MSc student here, Anna Kilanowski, with Sharon and my team. So this team gave us or allowed us access, that's a phrase we're looking for, allowed us access to the data they got through trial-specific collection in blue, and the healthcare systems data that we're getting from NHS Digital on deaths in green. So each pair here is one of the yearly snapshots that we're getting. They were getting infrequent data, downloads of data, infrequent data collection here. And you can see that always, in green, there's more deaths known in the healthcare systems data than there was in the trial-specific data collection. But actually, the shaded area is a number that were known by both. So there were always some deaths that were known through trial-specific data collection, but weren't yet known in the NHS digital data system. And the higher dotted line is the total. But does it matter? Is that sufficient at this point? Could you say, if we'd only used that data, would it be good enough? So we need more of these. We've put the SWOT there. SWOT 125 is in the SWOT repository in Belfast, so that if you've got the capability of doing this, you can run this yourself and then present or publish that data. And ultimately, we can stitch all of this together. We need more of these SWOT comparisons in the data set. So the one from the HEAT PPCI group, Sarah Blake, Rod Stables put this out a year or so back, but actually the data from like 7 or 8 years ago, some of these great studies end up languishing. They never seem to be a high priority for people. So we'll talk in a second about that. Charlie Harper and the Ascend team did a really nice one that came out in the JAMA network at the very end of last year. So we need more of these. Sam Ahmed, who's a PhD student working with me, is doing systematic review for ones that have been published in the last few years. And then I say the aim is to stitch them together, because then one data utility comparisons and say, yeah, it's fine, it's better. But it shouldn't put us off. You get a few, we get that reassurance. If you see that you can't use them, if the data utility isn't good enough, we need a forum where we can take that to the providers to say, well, actually, it'd be great if we could use this. What are you going to do to make sure that we could be using this information? So, if you've got the potential to do one of these comparisons, if you've got routine data kicking around, or the ability to access that information that we could help you compare, or that you could compare directly by yourself, or you've done it and you haven't published it, could you publish it? Or could you share unpublished data with us if you don't have the capacity or capability within the team to take it on? We'd love to make that happen. We're about to do some of this in a trial called Stampede, which is a 12,000 patient trial in prostate cancer. We've got long-term trial-specific data collection already. And so we're just in the process of getting the data. NHS Digital, bless them, are giving us the data for far less money than usual because they're engaged in the methodology project. Some of the people in this comparison are part of NHS Digital, part of that team. So it's really important because they know if we can build out that evidence, that's going to draw more applications to them. So we're going to look at death, just to confirm what we all think we already know, chemotherapy, radiotherapy, adverse effects, and then the results of that finding will drive the way the data is going to be collected in the Stampede 2. Maybe you'd never need to fill in another radiotherapy form in your life because you can take the data directly out of the system. We think that should be the case. So this is called DUX. This is just launching at the moment. Let me talk briefly about the BHF Data Science Centre, where I say I've seconded there a week. This was launched in January 2020. It's a partnership between Health Data Research UK and the British Heart Foundation. My understanding is the biggest single investment the BHF has done. And the aim is to use to improve public cardiovascular health using large-scale data and innovative analytics in the UK and beyond. I say this team is growing. It's entirely virtual. I haven't yet had a chance to meet some of these people, all of whom are amazing when I speak to them. A fantastic team that's been assembled under Kathy Sudlow, our director. So they've got 6 thematic areas here about structured data, which is data in systems, about unstructured data, which is mostly imaging data so far, about personal monitoring data and wearables, about computable phenotypes, and we'll touch upon that in a second, about enhancing cohorts and data-enabled clinical trials. Plus there's a diabetes data science catalyst that's just connected in as well. So why should the data science center have a focus on trials amongst this? Well, it's all the reasons that Health Data Research UK should be, but also because a large proportion of trials are done in the broader cardiovascular area. And BHF is, of course, a key funder for cardiovascular trials. Many of the trials are very large, so there's a great scope here to be able to make them simpler. And many of the trials have actually, cardiovascular world is one where it's been using the data, many of those examples. So you're really sort of starting well. So the vision is to make a sort of a data-enabled approach, a default for people putting in applications in the future. That doesn't mean they're going to do it. I want the default to be at least, can you think about it? Even if the answer is no for you at that point, at least the default is you've thought about whether you can do it or not. So the aim is to increase the number of cardiovascular clinical trials using some routine data. And say, I'll run through the areas. Why did we choose those areas? Well, we ran a survey last spring, or I guess the spring before now, 56 responses just before I joined, looking at the challenges. And the challenges are the ones you'd expect here about easy access to data, timely access, availability of data, a lack of information, a lack of support and knowledge within the organization to be able to do this. The survey's online, it's been downloaded 400 times or so already, which is great. And I say some of these challenges are real, some of them are perceived, but it doesn't matter whether it's real or perceived. It's a challenge, so we need to address them, of course, don't we? So we also did a follow-up workshop with some of the respondents and then with the cardiac surgery group that Gavin Murphy has been pulling together. And we gave them a sort of a morning where they could rant and rage and write down all the problems, and then another morning looking at the solutions, and we've drawn that into the activities we're going to do. Again, you can read the report from that's recently come out. So the areas we're looking at is guidance, trying to just be there as a friend, as a partner, in trying to make things easier to navigate, help you find that information, to document, to make things easier, to be good dance partners and not treading on toes and not being where we're not welcome or not needed. Provide that guidance, make clear what data sets are available on the website very soon. The ones that we think are relevant to cardiovascular trials will be very easily linked. So that should be very simple for people. I try to run sort of support packages as well, support workshops. I say think about best practice and help people understand this, shareable lessons. So think about a study in the cardiovascular world of a catalogue of case studies in the cardiovascular world. We started this with the Black Internship Program last summer. There'll be some reaching out to teams to flesh out on some of these very soon. Then hopefully Health Data Research UK will expand this beyond. We will use our leverage, our place in the room to improve things. And I think what the real challenge is we don't know how much it costs to get data most of the time. You just don't know up front. And very often you can't get a quote to what data you want. You don't know what data you want till your data manager's in place. You don't get your data manager till you've got your grant. By the time you've got your grant, it's too late to be thinking about how much it costs to get the data in the first place. So again, it's another cycle that needs breaking. You've got one bite at the funding cherry at the moment. I think probably we need two, and we need the funders to understand that. So targeted drive of project activity, again, this is partly trying to embed some of these SWOTs, these data utility comparisons in work that people are putting. But again, we do have some resources there. So if you've got a cardiovascular SWOT you want to discuss, or capabilities for one, we'd love to talk through. Then a piece of work that's just starting up is we called SCORE CVD for now, developing standard outcome definitions here. And this is really thinking about these phenotypes. Now the phenotypes are sort of important here. Why am I showing you this? Well, I think you've got a pancake and a Yorkshire pudding here. And the important thing here is the ingredients are exactly the same. The way in which you combine them gives you completely different output, right? So, if we're thinking about sort of code lists, it's not just code lists with your routine data, it's how you combine that information that comes through, it's how you cook it through there. So phenotypes, it's just the sort of the health state one is in. A computable phenotype is effectively, it's your recipe, it's using variables found in the electronic health records to define that disease state. And you could think about our outcome measures. We don't use the term phenotype. Our outcome measure for a trial is effectively a change of phenotypic state. You could see it that way. I'm not sure we'll embrace that language, particularly in due course, but you could see it in that way. And your eligibility criteria is another phenotype defining your patient. So a phenotyping algorithm is a set of program rules that can actually automate some of this. So we're trying to think about how much we could do this. So define best practice for defining these algorithms at the moment, and identifying some of the code lists that at least have been done, try and clarify what those recipes are that draw that together, and then define some more of those. So now that so with Spiros, who's the lead for the computable phenotypes, with Sarah and Jackie, the project managers are working on this. We're looking through the standardization. So we set up the steering group to define those requirements. We just start to populate outcome-specific groups, and I say looking hopefully at ones that should be straightforward: as stroke, outcome measure, major bleeding, myocardial infarction, heart failure, death. Death should be fairly easy and cross-cutting for each of these. But and then the elements of sort of MACE outcome measures, which as I look at your protocols in the cardiovascular world, seem to be so varied across what that definition is. So you've got to be clear whose recipe you're following. And then the aim is to share and promote the standardized outcomes in due course. Let me talk to you very briefly about the Trials Methodology Research Partnership. This is an organisation that's grown out of the old MRC network of hubs of trials methodology research, now includes the UK Trial Managers Network, the Global Health Network, the Trials Methodology Research Network in Ireland, Health Data Research UK, and the Registered Trials Units in the UK. There's many PhD students across 25 universities, and now there's the MRC doctoral training program. So this sort of cohort of PhD students that are going through. TMRP has got 8 working groups in these particular areas. I'm going to touch upon the Health Informatics Working Group, which I've been co-chairing with Amanda Farron in Leeds. Got a strategy, 100 members at the moment, a strategy committee, which we're co-chairing, and then 6 topic groups. So we've got one looking at routinely collected healthcare data, broadly trying to tie into projects about how we connect in, one around participant data and getting the data directly out of participants, not necessarily wearables, but also that structure of getting data online much better. And then one about that technology, how do we think about interactive electronic health records? There's a group looking at digital health interventions more and more. How are you using some of these apps that are being used to actually, where the intervention is a sort of form of digital health and your outcome measures. More and more we'll see these, and there are particular challenges in those sort of trials. One around data sharing. Data sharing is a real issue. Onward data sharing from clinical trials, something we should all do, something that none of us do well enough, I'm pretty sure. And I come from a unit that claims to do more data sharing than most, mostly because of the longevity of the unit, and we know we don't do enough so far. And actually, there's the sharing of data to us. If we're thinking about that routine data, sharing data to the unit is really, to units is important. And then one around designs. So a couple of the projects have been involved with, there's one on e-consent, we'll find a workshop on e-consent. Everyone's trying to move to this approach, particularly around the pandemic, right? And one on onward sharing of qualitative data that's been generated in trials. I'll touch more upon these three, but still briefly. So spirit routine, the spirit checklist, standardized protocol items in randomized interventional trials, a checklist for developing our protocols and maintaining our standards, complementing that consult for reporting. Both have got various extensions. Consult now has an extension for routine data. I couldn't find it online, but it's done. I'm sure it must be up there, and it's my inability to look. But there wasn't one for spirit. So Patricia Kearney in the group in Ireland is leading the development of this with TMRP. And they're just coming up to the consensus stage. So hopefully that will be moving along very soon. Fiona Ludvidja in Cardiff has been leading the Cormorant UK project, trying to come up with a consensus on the methodological opportunities, consensus statement. We know what those challenges are, but sometimes actually formalizing that in one of these approaches makes it easier for funders then to say it's okay to fund something. So we've whipped through this very quickly. So two-stage Delphi, the consensus meeting is happened recently, and Fiona is now out doing this. And you can find the details of this on Twitter. I partly grayed it out so I don't talk about it in any detail, because I know we don't have time. But the 7 priorities here, and the paper is in draft. And that's led to a project called Primerant that Paula Williamson, who also leads TMRP, with Fiona and Amanda are working on. Another HDR UK mini project that's here with 2 elements addressing 2 of those priorities coming out of Cormorant. One that requires training, one that requires research. It can be done in short term. They've got funding until March, so really useful information is going to come out from that. One of the things that didn't get prioritized, which I think is a major challenge, is around retention of data. So you can get the data, can you keep the data long enough to be able to use it? Because at least with NHS Digital, they ask you to reapply for the data every year. So that's no good if you then find you're not allowed to have the data. Now, it doesn't require methodology to do that. All you need is an organization that's willing to change what its contract is and just say you can keep the data. So now, just through pressure, through conversations, through explaining what the challenges are for trials, the default contracts, at least if you go through the DigiTrials route, I'm not sure about the DARS route, is changed to say it's every 3 years, I think, or longer if the regulations say you have to keep the data. So you no longer have that threat of destroying the data hanging over you. And we need to make sure that all of those data collectors are doing this. Is it being applied retrospectively? Trials, I'm not sure that it is. But every trial potentially just wants to check in and be sure they keep the data according to the regulation. And then briefly, Health Data Research UK. What are we planning going forward? So Marion Matham and Oxford and I are co-leading this bid, which is under review. So we don't know that any of this is going to happen. So I won't talk about it in too much detail. But what we know is that the knowledge at the moment is very siloed that people have. There's a few silos of knowledge. Oxford is a real silo. They know loads, but Marion's keen to get that information out. What we know from UCL, we're keen to get out and keen to share that information, provide teams with the tools and expertise. So we've picked out 7 areas, 2 of the transforming data for trials, one of which is around a trial stakeholder prioritization forum. There's nothing that draws together actually the people that want to use data with the people that hold data with the people that review trials, to try to draw this together to prioritize some of the challenges, to actually give them an opportunity to talk together. And then set out this route map that people keep threatening to make and nobody has, that parallels to the NIHR toolkit may overlay. We're talking maybe separate, we're talking to NIHR about that, but to provide that guidance for each stage, I think that'll be really, really helpful for people. So, I focus mostly on outcome measures so far, but for recruitment, it is potentially very important. The use of routine data to access it to assess the feasibility of a question. NHS Digital is trying a sort of self-service approach, but I think it's pretty clunky from the little look I had. But there is Find and Recruit services that groups are setting up. And actually, we should be able to use this to support the recruitment of underserved underserved patient groups as well. particularly important on that sort of include framework that NIHR has been pushing out. And so, you know, the support for finding patients, identifying patients and recruiting is probably quite important for prevalence case trials. I've grown up doing cancer trials, you know, they're incident cases. They come to you, they come to the clinic, you know where to recruit the patients. But we've got something where people are out in the system, they're being followed up, you're trying to recruit them, you know, that's much more difficult. But again, others are on the case without recruitment issues, so I haven't focused on that at all. And of course, we recognize that healthcare systems data, it's just not as rich as electronic health records, those local, the GP, the hospital data. So what could we do? Well, we could change our process and start saying, let's get the data from the electronic health record system instead. But that's duplicative. You need to set that up every hospital. There's some private companies, Fire, Ignite, have been trying to do this, but you have just been bought out by a company and by one of the big pharma. I think that will continue to happen. I don't see that as being a route. You could set a challenge to onboard more data. That feels pretty straightforward. Could you get in Scotland, in Wales, in England, in Northern Ireland, get them to onboard more data sets to get that richness? But you know, with that move, at least in England, I'm not sure it's going to happen with that move to that subnational data sets. That's where the richness is supposed to be. But you know, so maybe one of the approaches is we change our outcome measures in trials. We actually make the compromise, and you know, we start saying, you know, rather than having, let's increase the overlap by saying what we need in trials is more what's already in the healthcare systems data. Let's change our mindset. Let's change our outcome measures to what we can actually achieve. And in the cardiovascular world, I think you can do that quite easily, or you can start doing that because many more of the outcome measures that I think are achievable and relevant are there. For cancer, it's more difficult. Your cancer progression in cancer trials, your progression doesn't have a sort of button, doesn't have a tick box in there. It's madness that that's not in the health systems data. And for things like neurodegenerative trials and discussions I've been having with people, what they ask for in trials and what they do in routine appointments are completely different, it seems. So they're a long way off being able to do that at the moment. So a very quick ad break. I mentioned the International Clinical Trials and Methodology Conference. It's taking place in Harrogate next month. I'd be foolish not to encourage you to come along. There are a few sessions that are relevant to what we're talking about, and Fiona will be building on more of the Cormorant data. Macy will be talking more about the Dedicate work. But those are two sessions that are specifically about electronic healthcare systems data. There's also a workshop about applying the data and one on e-consent. There's about 800 people registered for the conference already. So it's the biggest academic-led conference. I'd be foolish not to tell you, UCL would hate me if I didn't mention the MSc in Clinical Trials that we run, which is now entirely online. MSc in Clinical Trial Statistics that's just starting up as well. And I would mention, I run the Independent Data Monitoring Committee course, which I think is the only one that gets run. So if you know anybody for your trials where you've got somebody who's fairly new to data monitoring committees, who's getting involved, either reporting to or sitting on, doesn't have much experience. We've had about 300 people go through this course. It's always well received. We're running it next week, week after. Depends whether we have to cancel it because there may be a funeral that day. But there may be some cancellations for September if you know anybody. And if not, we'll definitely be doing it in February. Anyway, that's the end of my ad break. Please forgive me. Always feel obliged to do that. Final point I wanted to make then, there is more and more use of electronic health record systems in hospitals. They do have the potential to break the blinding of your blinded clinical trials if you don't set them up properly. And there's so many roles that get put into these things that actually it's possible. Let's pretend that I don't know of any instances where this has happened and keep it all hypothetical, but there is possibility to do this. So we have a short paper. You can document this on your site initiation checklist. I would encourage people to think about what that process is and engage the local EHR team to protect. And the site PI needs to take ownership of checking. We've put up sort of a blinding matrix you can find in the back of this paper. And I would encourage trial managers and trial teams to work together to fill this in. I think it's a really helpful local tool. But just, it's slightly tangential to what we're talking about, but I think this is potentially important. Okay, so in summary now, what does the future look like? I think increasingly it's going to be hybrid trials. We should be reducing the trial-specific data collection and increasing the amount of healthcare systems data. We're a long way away from using all healthcare systems data, but let's start moving towards that hybridization. We need increased awareness about those opportunities and those challenges, and training needs a key to that, right? We need to know how to take consent and consent in a way that allows us to get the data and keep the data and make people feel comfortable, even if the names of these organizations change, and that seems to be a challenge. We need to understand the coding that goes on behind this, the coding that doctors are using both in GPs and hospital systems, which isn't the same, and then the coding that goes on in CDISC. approaches if we're going to be dealing with regulators. The issues have come out in analysis on this. We might end up needing more federated data systems, so data analysts in here as well. And we need to see trials more and more as a collaboration between clinical trials units and the data providers. Now, that has implications for trial team structures, that even has implications for trial costs, and actually requires quite a lot of upscaling and upskilling at the data providers themselves. And I'm not sure they're quite ready for that, but they need to be. So clinical trials, of course, will remain the gold standard for evidence-based medicine. There's a number of people who say you can get real-world evidence that does it. It's nonsense. We need clinical trials to give us some good answers. It's the only way that protects us from the bias. But better use of electronic health records, better use of healthcare systems data is a key element, one key element to improving that efficiency of clinical trials. But it requires a cultural shift for all of us. We need to engage in that cultural shift. It needs new knowledge. So there's a lot of work going on to lay that groundwork. And I would encourage you all to engage. Lots of people I work with, lots of people I want to acknowledge. I'm very briefly gone past on the screen. Thank you for your attention, and Rob, thank you very much for having me here today.
So Matt, that was absolutely wonderful. And thank you for coping with the IT. I do apologise about that. You did marvellously. You kept the tap dancing going.
Yeah.
So thank you for that.
You just couldn't hear on the carpet, and those at the back couldn't see.
Yeah. So what we're going to try and do, I'll work from this, Amanda, if you want to circulate, is we're going to have some time for some questions, Matt. We're happy to do so. And we're also going to try and do some questions online. So Ross, can I just check, was there anything that's coming in the Q&A? I couldn't see anything on my
PC. There was a comment, but there's no questions.
No questions? Okay, so if you are online and you've got any questions from Matt, please put them in, and Ross, maybe you could look at and pick them up. But questions in the room, questions from Matt. Who'd like to go first? Please. Oh, sorry, we'll come back to you in a second. Julie.
I really enjoyed your talk, Matt. What do you do if you're involved in a hypothetical situation where you've got an ECRF and you put in all your site data, and then you do data linkage by NHS Digital, and you have different outcomes rates? How do you square that off?
Okay, so I guess you plan up front. If you're going to have that NHS Digital data, you need a plan for whether you're using that as kind of a backup, are you using it as exploratory, as methodology, or are you using it, or are you planning to use that to supplement your data? Because if you do find something different, what is it? It's probably a lack of reporting through one system or the other. So your analysis plan needs to account for, were you relying on just the trial-specific data, that hybridization, or were you using just the routine data? So I would say you need to plan appropriately on that, but then share, talk to the world about that discrepancy. How big is that discrepancy? How has that come about? So that actually we can sort of work through with other people how best to be dealing with that. Does that sort of answer the question, Julie?
I think this is our next question, Matt. I just say, can you maybe introduce yourself so Matt knows where you're from?
Okay, sure. Thank you so much. So Chris Halsey, I'm the head of the School of Cancer Sciences at the university. As someone who runs researches into rare diseases and runs a clinical trial across 14 countries in Europe, obviously you want to try and move to this kind of system, but that produces some very unique challenges. And I wondered about that kind of how much systemic bias there might be using healthcare records in one country and maybe source data collection in another country, but that's even feasible, and whether EU initiatives are looking at ways to harmonise this, and whether our UK approaches will be able to feed into those types of EU approaches.
Yeah, so my knowledge of the European space isn't what it could be yet. There's a Darwin project which is trying to look at real world evidence, but I don't think they've got much of a focus on clinical trials, Chris, is my understanding. We try to embed some of that data integrity work into an unsuccessful grant application in the last couple of months. But why do you think there will be a bias necessarily in your question if you're using forms in one country and routine data in the other? I'm not sure there should be a bias in the responses, providing you're comfortable the data you get out is good. I think what we just need is reassurance that the integrity of the data, the utility of the data, the route that you chose in each of those countries was appropriate. And then you're defining, in Denmark, in Sweden, in Austria, whatever, we were using routine data, but in France and in Ireland, we were using trial-specific data collection. I think providing we're comfortable with that integrity, with the utility, with the provenance of the data, it should be fine to use. And I hope that the international trials over time, part of that hybridization will be some countries will be using and some won't, but that will shift over time. So we do need better work together, and we need, I talked about the fact that the data integrity work, we've spoken to the MHRA, but we need the EMA to be happy, we need the FDA to be happy, we need the PMDA to be happy. And actually, we want the MHRA to be happy with trials that use routine data in the US and Canada as well. So, I think that the international element of this is important, but healthcare systems data sets themselves vary greatly from country to country and how they're set up. So I think in terms of the setup, we can only focus on what happens in the UK. But as an international organisation, you've got the ability to challenge people and potentially draw them together to raise something. So I'd love to talk to you further about that, Chris.
Hi, Matt. I don't know if this is on. Yeah. So my name's Kevin Blythe. I'm Professor of Research in SMU, and I've done, those trials in cancer mainly, but also in COVID recently, including recovery and other things. I guess one of my question was about who takes. I mean, there's clearly benefits to this approach in the longer term, but in the short term there are risks and some uncertainties. And who do you see as who needs to take the risks to get the ball rolling, as it were? Because there likely are going to be risks around if we run an academic trial of a drug therapy in cancer, and we might have a positive result, but at the end of the day, we don't reach the bar for regulatory approval because we use routine data, even though all these issues that you mentioned are true. And you focus here on non-commercial trials, I think, reflecting part of that risk averseness. So there is a kind of, how do we do this? And how do we mitigate risks? And how do we explain that to our institutions and our funders and our patients when they may be in a trial that may never translate for that reason?
So I agree. So the risks very much need to be shared. I don't think it's an individual risk for any particular group. That's why we kind of need to build up that evidence overview so that the risks can be reduced on you. There's plenty of challenges, not just the routine data in academic-led trials that are being used for regulatory submission. And the reliance on routine data is one part of that. But you've got the opportunity potentially in your trial to at least ask the could have been question. You collected the routine data, you plan in your analysis plan to use only the trial-specific collection, but you then go back and do the methodology research of, well, could we have used that routine data and what would be the implications of that? And then you can draw that into your next trial. Potentially, and this is some of the discussion we've been having with a number of people, you can do this in an unblinded way. You don't need to, you can do this without jeopardizing your trial at all. You could do it either across arms or just in your control group. But in the first couple of years of your trial, you could ask that could have been question. Do we get enough from actually the healthcare systems data that we didn't need to have done the trial-specific data collection, and then ramp down some of your trial-specific data collection going forward as well. But it all needs to be part of your risk assessment. It needs to be part of the discussion with the regulators up front.
But do you think in the medium term trials will have to have that redundancy? They'll have to do both approach for a period until we can strip back
Yeah, they may well do. And as a result of that, of course, Kevin, that means that the cost of trials goes up a little bit because you need that routine data. You have to pay for that routine data. So trials cost a lot, but actually I think there's a hump to get over in terms of cost before we get down the other side where I think trials might be much cheaper. So it's whether people are going to invest in getting over that hump.
Matt, conscious of time, I think we'll one more question if that's okay. So the floor is yours.
Matt, thanks for your talk. My name's Ben Shelley. I'm an anaesthetist, intensivist and NRS lead for anesthesia periop in critical care in Scotland. Increasingly we're seeing trials using more. Sorry, I'll just.
I don't think I'll hear you with that in.
Apologies. Increasingly, we're seeing trials in our specialty using more routine collected data, and that's turning into a barrier for Scottish participation because the data is collected differently north of the border and south of the border. So how's that UK-wide bigger picture going to join up and actually streamline that rather than actually fragment us more?
So I share your concern, and we need to make sure that fragmentation doesn't happen in that way, I think. You know, I worry that with the move to these secure data environments, these subnational TRAs, England is also going to become further subdivided. And those aren't going to be exactly the same. So we need to find a way through the federation, through that interoperability of the electronic health record systems, through that, that upskilling of data scientists and statisticians, that consistency of coding and the availability of information. We need to reassure ourselves that we can do this, and that becomes part of it. And hopefully that also leaves us with an ability to work with our international colleagues if those same processes are going on. But I don't think we can sort of sit back. We need to find a way of doing this. So again, conversations, case studies about where those challenges are and what you've had to butt up against, and how I feel that sort of thing that will be useful for that trial stakeholder prioritization forum that I spoke about, to have a presentation on, come and talk about, and then they can address how do you pick up on fragmentation. Yeah.
I should just say that Nick Mills is leading an initiative in Scotland. Actually, one of the priorities is to make sure that Scottish data can be merged with the English data, because we know if we're running UK studies from Scotland, if we can't merge the English data, we're stuffed. So it is right there up on the agenda, which is data compatibility across England and Scotland.
Thanks, John. Thank you very much indeed. We just show again our total thanks. So just to say, I think, Matt, you're sticking around over lunch, right? So people do want to grab Matt, please do take advantage over our dinner. Okay, so our next speaker is well known to you, Professor Iain McInnes CBE, and Vice Principal and Head of our college. Now, Iain would love to be with us, but has the dubious pleasure of being based in Ghent because he's there for a rheumatology conference. So I'm hoping we're able to go live to Professor McInnes. This is where I look at my IT team. Iain, can you hear us?
I can hear you very well. I hope you can hear me too.
Perfect. Now, Iain, we can hear you, but I can see you on my laptop, but we're not seeing you on the main screen. So is there anything we can do about that, guys?
I would have said protecting the audience from my physical appearance is a definite
well, I didn't want to
benefit
say
for all
that, Iain, but you
concerned,
are looking smart this morning. Oh,
I
here
know.
you are. So we've got
there
you
we
on
go.
screen. So the floor is, thank you for joining us.
Oh, thanks ever so much. And first of all, congratulations to you and the team for putting such a fantastic conference together. I'm actually being a rheumatology researcher today. It's been great fun. I'm having a blast. But I have to say, really like to have been with you all in person today. And when I listened to Matt talking there, I was even more enthused to have been with you in person. But look, it's a fantastic conference, and it's really great to hear the conversations that are evolving. So I will not speak for any great length of time today. There are far more important discussions coming in the working groups, study groups that will follow my short set of remarks. But I did want to put today in context. We're now just a few weeks into our new structure as a college. As you are very well aware, maybe a little less so for NHS colleagues, we have reorganized the college. We've formed ourselves into 8 schools with thematic alignment, all integrating research, teaching, and indeed the generation of innovation and impact. So this new structure is interesting. It's not experimental in the sense that it mimics a lot of what the rest of the university and other colleges has been doing in the last decade, but the early signs are very positive indeed. We've had some really positive feedback, and I look forward to hearing more about how people are getting on. And one of the key elements of our structure was to create an agility in our way of doing research. If you think about it, we're a civic university, and the higher education sector in general in the UK and indeed globally has high expectations placed upon it now. The cost of delivering these amazing institutions that are the universities of the United Kingdom are borne still largely by the Exchequer. And to a very large extent, therefore, society expects. And it's unlikely that when we take on major societal challenges that we will have managed to align all of the right expertise in a given school that is necessary to take on and deliver the answers that society seeks. And so our structure has given us agility now to allow people to contribute from different schools into research centres. And those centres, some of them are self-explanatory. We have an MRC Centre for Virus Research. We have a BHF Centre of Excellence. But there are other centres that are more, if you like, incubator spaces. These are entities that the university is bringing together in areas of real thematic importance. And that is one of the things that I've asked Rod and Stefan, working with the directors of our CTUs, John and Rob, to start to conceptualise, and of course aligning that with Julie and her team, and to create a new trial centre that will bring together a whole range of thematic excellence in and across the college and across the NHS in Greater Glasgow and Clyde, because there's no question that if we are going to deliver to society's demands, we've got to work together. And we have to make this extraordinary powerhouse that is, and I think growingly has to be, the Glasgow trial experience. So what we're going to try and deliver in this new centre will, amongst other things, be a fusion of expertise. We have the world leaders in heart failure research. We have world leaders in arthritis research, world leaders in cancer research, and so on and so forth. But very rarely do they come together. And that makes no sense at all. So we want to bring the expertise across the college and NHS into a place where that can be shared, where best practice can be shared, the most up-to-date trial methodologies. When you listen to what Matt has just been telling us about, we really need to move into the 21st century. Now, to some extent, we're doing that, but ideally, I'd like to see Glasgow leading that. And by coming together, we give ourselves the best chance of being amongst the leaders. We will use the centre to align our clinical trial units and our areas of thematic excellence, and with the cross-disciplinary interactions, we're going to, if you like, bring the tide up right across the college and health board research efforts. We hope this will create a really enhanced environment for our young researchers to train right across disciplines and also right across job families. I would commend to you, for example, the Wellcome Trust programme that Francis Mayer is leading in the area of multi-morbidity, in which we're training doctors, pharmacists, physiotherapists, and a whole range of health professionals. And I think that is emblematic of what we're about in Glasgow in our future. It's working together, respecting the different job families, and by so doing, bringing collective excellence to the fore. I think the centre will improve our funding success rates. We shouldn't ever be sending something out of the Glasgow region that is not already excellence before it goes. And that, I hope, will raise the reputation and, of course, our ability to do things. There's no question you need the grants if you're going to do the work, and it's much more fun. And with all of that, we will improve the quality of what we do. Every patient who comes into clinical trials making a huge commitment, every patient, I should say subject, who comes into a trial that is not necessarily focused on the clinic, but is focused, for example, in population health, in behavioural studies and social science studies, and this centre will accommodate all of these efforts. That individual is making a commitment, and I think it behoves us to reflect on and respect that commitment by delivering something that is really excellent. And of course, there's the joy of bringing all of our NHS and university colleagues together in common purpose and common endeavour, because by working together, it's, well, you know what, we'll do better and we'll have much more success. What will that success look like in 5 years? Well, we'll be doing world-class research, that being delivered by world-class researchers. That in turn will bring, for example, better outcomes for our patients, better understanding of how society works. Glasgow will be the go-to place, not for everything, but in areas of thematic focus, we will be amongst the world leaders. Now, we already are in some areas, but let us consolidate those areas and expand and enhance others. And we want to be pivotal, therefore, in the global trials marketplace. And that fits entirely with the quality and the talent that is sitting in the room today. We are already very good at what we do. We want to go from, to misquote Jim Collins, from good to great. How do we really make that next step up? So this today in the workshop and in the weeks to come is an amazing opportunity for you to feed into the process of forming the centre, making it ours rather than someone else's. Please support Rod, Stefan, and our C2U leads, Rod and John, and of course Julie and her excellent team. Please support them as we bring this new centre into reality. And with that, I'm going to hand back to Rod by thanking you all for all the amazing work that you're already doing, and for allowing me to share some of my excitement about the journey upon which we're now going to embark. Thanks very much indeed.
Ian, thanks very much. We much appreciate you taking time out from your busy schedules. So we'll let you get on with your day and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thanks
a lot.
Have a great day, guys.
So maybe just at this point, I think we're going to be losing our online folks. We'd always anticipated this was going to be an in-room meeting, so we're not able to facilitate the group discussion we're about to go into online. So if you are online, thanks very much. Hope you found it useful, and we'll look forward to seeing you hopefully in person at a future event. So